Supervisor Miller.
Mr. Chairman, on this item, I know we're voting today on the contract. I don't know if we want to consider these both at the same time, but I have.
was just going to suggest that.
Okay.
We can do that.
Okay.
And that's item 6 on the
Addendum.
initial addendum, addendum
Yep.
1.
Yep. So my questions are related to, I know you went through, had an evaluation done, you've come up with asbestos abatement for $380,000. And what I noted is that there was a note in the report that said we could not estimate what potential there might be for the floor under the bowling lanes, as they're still in there. So my question is, rather than estimate 0, why wouldn't we put some sort of estimate in there? Because the chances of that being in there are probably pretty high.
Mr. Chairman and Supervisor Miller, the high number, the 380, assumes there is asbestos under the bowling lanes, and therefore that's the upside estimate of total cost.
Oh, that wasn't the way I read it. But.
Well, that's the upside. We have actually had some discussions with the owner, and the owner basically will allow us to remove the bowling lanes at the same time we're doing the rest of the asbestos abatement. So if there is asbestos under there, it can be basically, the cost can be economized simply because we're doing it all at once. And we make, in this supplemental agreement, which is the other agenda item, we made no warranty as to the quality and our ability to salvage those bowling lanes intact. And so they may come out in pieces. But that's the present owner's risk, and he assumes that.
So we are going to be removing the
Yes, we are.
the lanes for him. Okay. Okay, and then it's going to take approximately 3 months to do the asbestos abatement. And the way that I understand this documentation is that we're now going to be paying $2.7 million for this after the owner has agreed to reduce it by $150,000.
Mr. Chairman and Supervisor Miller, yes, that's correct.
Why wouldn't he reduce it by the $380,000?
Simply because it's a negotiated reduction with the owner, and that's what our property staff was able to achieve during the negotiation.
Okay, and this appraisal of $2.2 million was done, and the appraiser said he did not consider asbestos, that there was any asbestos or any types of issues with the building at the time he appraised it. So I would assume that $2.2 million appraisal would go down significantly based upon the asbestos and the adhesives in the ceiling tiles and the walls, etc. So did we go back and ask for another appraisal with this more current information?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Miller, that assumption is incorrect. Let me let Neil explain the basis of the appraisal.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and Supervisor Miller, when the appraiser didn't address asbestos because he had no information with respect to that, but he makes an assumption that a buyer may purchase the building and use it as is, and therefore there may not need to be any asbestos abatement. In this case, because the county is choosing to go in and do remodeling which requires asbestos abatement, that is an additional cost to the county, but it wouldn't necessarily change the appraisal because another purchaser could come in and utilize the building as is without having to do any asbestos abatement.
Okay, I get that, but the appraised price per square foot for this facility was $57 per square foot, and all the comps that he identified in Phoenix were between $20 and $30 per square foot. And there was never any really good explanation as to why the bowling alley on Miracle Mile in Tucson was worth twice as much as what you would see, or 30% more of what you would see in Phoenix.
Supervisor Miller, I don't recall that our appraiser was using Phoenix comps.
Yeah,
I believe he used local comps with respect to appraising this particular property. And he wasn't necessarily using bowling alleys because his opinion was that the highest and best use was not to use the facility as a bowling alley.
But he also had what had been selling in Phoenix for bowling alley prices, and he said between $20 to $30 a square foot.
Right, and that's the reason that he didn't find the highest and best use to be a bowling alley. And therefore, he found that an appraiser has to look at the highest and best use. To sell it as a bowling alley would be a reduced price. That's correct. But the highest and best use for this building was not found to be as a bowling alley.
That doesn't make any sense to me at all, that the price would change depending upon what you're going to use it for. That makes no sense,
Well,
but
if I could explain that, if you'd like, the bowling alley, the uses of bowling alley is a specific business that would not necessarily generate enough money to make that the highest and best use. The appraiser found that other uses, for example, could be a charter school, it could be a storage facility. He identified a number of other uses, all of which would generate a higher value for that property, and therefore he would not use bowling alley as the...
So the appraised value changes depending on what you tell the appraiser you're going to use the building for? Is that what you're telling me?
It doesn't change based on what we're using it for. It changes based on what the appraiser sees as the highest and best use. So the appraiser makes the determination as to what the best use and what would generate the highest value for the property.
I would think if he was doing an appraisal that he would appraise it based upon what we were going to use it for, not his decision as to what the highest and best use for. That makes no sense to me at all.
Actually, if he did it based on what the county was using it for, it may actually have generated a higher value. So what he was basing it on is what he saw as other available uses.
Okay, and he appraised it at $2.2 million, but yet even with the asbestos identified, we're paying $2.7 million plus closing costs. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I find it fascinating that whenever we're on the buying end, we always pay over appraisal, and when we're on the selling end, things go down.
Supervisor Miller, Mr. Huckleberry, could he make a comment right now?
Yeah,
based on this?
go ahead.
Please.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and Supervisor Miller, I think what Neil is saying is probably the most important discussion, because, as you know, when we did this first analysis, I think we've gone through this now once already, and so this is the second time, and we basically did the analysis that says what's the economic value of the property as it's constructed to the county. And that basically allows us to collapse all of our leases into an ownership position. And when you get a payback period in just a few years, about 6 years, it means that basically if that appraiser was looking at the value of that property to where it can be paid back in 6 years versus 15 years of a typical lease, it means it's a pretty high value. On top of that, we went back and looked again at the market conditions and office leases that are occurring in the areas that we have our leases today, and that market is becoming significantly tighter. And we would estimate that probably there's at least a minimum of 1.5% to 3% increase in those lease values per year into the future.
And then we're going to invest, was it $4 million into repairing this facility? So we're going to have $7 million into it by the time we're done?
Yes, Madam, Mr. Chairman and Supervisor Miller, we're going to remodel the facility. And so that means, and if you looked at our reports that facilities give you, the basic structure of the building is ideal for a multi-purpose county tenant because it's clear span, its bowling alley use allows not a lot of pillars to interfere with the actual redesign and repurposing of the building. We've also committed to basically keep the facades preserved, so we're kind of meeting the Miracle Mile historic context, and we'll probably, not probably, we'll also save and salvage the sign. And so I think we're doing the best we can to be a good neighbor to the area, as well as preserve the historic Miracle Mile, and at the same time provide a repurposed facility that otherwise, I think, on the market, given the owner's age, is going to be sold, and if it wasn't our use, it would probably be for multifamily housing.
Well, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Supervisor Miller. Then we're on to item 6 on the addendum, real property, Golden Pins LLC, amendment number 1.
I'll move the item.
Second. Motion and a second.
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Christie.
regarding the decrease in the price, I was against the purchase of this property at its original price presented to the board at a previous meeting. I am still against the purchase of this property at a reduced price, so I will be voting no.
That's fine. Any other objections?
I object.
Let's do a roll call.
Supervisor Bronson?
Aye.
Supervisor Christie?
No?
Supervisor Miller?
No.
Supervisor Valadez?
Aye.
Chairman Elias?
Aye. Motion carries 3-2.